I'm gonna go ahead and start talking.
Wait,
Good. Oh, okay.
give me a couple seconds.
Oh, here's our shoot. Here's our.
I just want to make sure that it's going live on our page.
Okay. Actually, so Natasha, I'm sorry, Natasha and Dr. Sadie, we're gonna start with Corinne. Okay. Hey, Corinne, after I do my intro. Good evening, everyone. My name is Krista Jones, and on behalf of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, Phi Upsilon Zeta chapter in Sterling, Virginia, we are excited to open this Power of She chat this evening. So, I want to ground us with a conversation before I introduce our amazing guests tonight with the cookout theory. So, I don't know if you all have heard of Big Mo's cookout theory. She is an influencer on social media. And the original, she started this theory to talk about how economic changes impact a community, and she compares it to a cookout. But today we're going to use it a little differently, and we're going to talk about voting rights and then mental health and domestic violence. So the cookout theory is based on questions like who invited you? Okay. So tonight we're going to use that analogy to discuss voting rights and civic education. So Big Mo talks about who invited you as a measure of relational trust. When we talk about voting rights with Corinne, we are talking about the entry point to our community. If we don't vote, we allow unsolicited input, people who are coming into our neighborhoods to make decisions who don't know us and didn't bring anything to the table or the cookout and weren't invited by anybody. What did you bring? That's our mental health focus. The theory says, what did you bring? That's your contribution to the community. Big Mo's framework shows us that years of financial instability and heightened tensions can drain what we're able to produce as a culture and a community. And then who are you with? That's the domestic violence focus. So Big Mo's theory looks at proximity. The cookout is supposed to be a protected, sensitive space, but economic shifts often lead to a broken infrastructure in our personal lives. So when we discuss domestic violence, we're talking about cultural stewardship. So, as Big Mo says, you are always welcome, but you are not always entitled. So, we're going to start off. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to have two panels this evening. I'm going to go ahead and introduce all of our panelists, and then I'm going to turn it over to Corinne. First, we have Corinne Charles Dongo, who is a veteran political strategist and state director for U.S. Senator Tim Kaine, and she manages outreach across Virginia. She also played a very important role, and I'll let her talk to you all about that in the special election of 2026 in Virginia on redistricting. She is a dedicated advocate for civic engagement and women's empowerment. We also have Dr. Kavita Saini, and she is a clinical and forensic psychologist and executive director of Rhythm Psychological Services in Sterling, Virginia. She specializes in court-ordered forensic evaluations and trauma treatment using cognitive-based therapy. And she also serves as a director of psychological services at North Spring Behavioral Health. We also have Dr. Natasha Cook, who is a Northern Virginia-based clinical psychologist with 2 decades of experience specializing in evidence-based modalities like cognitive-based therapy. And she also reviews assessments to ensure accurate diagnoses and accommodations for children, adults, and families. So just a reminder, please put your questions in the chat today, and we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Corinne.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Krista, for having me this evening. I'm so excited to talk to you all. My assignment this evening is to talk about the special election on redistricting. I was the campaign manager for the Yes campaign. And so I want to break down the conversation this evening so that I could move quickly and make sure that all of you have time, not just for questions, but just to go on with this great programming that you guys have tonight. So I want to talk about what happened in its context so that we remember. And then I want to make sure we talk about what that accomplishment means. And then I also, given everything that's that's taken place since the election, I want to make sure it is very clear of why we can't be erased. So let me start with what happened. So putting into context, Virginia had a special election to redistrict. And without, taking up too much time, but giving a quick refresher, redistricting happened really, it started mid-decade redistricting, I should say, happened with North Carolina doing mid-decade redistricting that gave Republicans 3 seats in North Carolina, and then Texas redistricted, and then California redistricted, and Virginia came before. The question of redistricting also came before Virginia. And the leaders of Virginia chose to do redistricting as a means of ensuring that Virginians continue to have electoral power on the national level. And it was taken to the voters, unlike the redistricting that took place in North Carolina, unlike redistricting in Texas, but like redistricting in California, voters had a say in Virginia's redistricting that happened April 21st. And overwhelmingly, voters voted yes. I do want to take a moment to talk about that election. There was a lot of misinformation during that redistricting election, particularly misinformation and disinformation that was targeted towards Black and communities of color. And I think that's important in Krista's opening comments, because it makes you think about, well, if my vote is not important, why is there so many attacks for this vote? So I want to remind folks that your vote is absolutely important. And one thing that no matter what has happened, that is so proud about what this redistricting effort is, this was a spring election that was not planned. Voters didn't know about it a year ahead of time, and yet people came out to vote. In fact, more than 3.1 million people came out to vote and overwhelmingly voted yes. Before I get into the details, I do think it is important to talk about what the Yes campaign accomplished, because it has to do with the time that we're in. And I want to leave people with the impression that all of this still matters. No matter what, all of it matters. The Yes campaign knocked 650,418 doors in total, made 1.2 million phone calls. Now, this is not just a campaign, I should say. This is a campaign with partners on the ground, with organizations, with volunteers. The campaign itself had a very small amount of paid people. So all of this was organization and partners on the ground and volunteers who made this happen. So 657,418 doors, 1.2 million calls, 5.1 million texts. There was a campus program that resulted in 21,771 pledge cards by college campus students who signed pledge cards pledging that they're going to vote. There were 984 campus shifts. That means college students took upon themselves to knock doors or knock the campuses themselves, their dorms themselves. And we had over 100 students that were volunteers. We had over 61 town halls in partnership with organizations like yourselves. There were 4 of those town halls were bilingual. And 18 of those were hosted or co-hosted by faith organizations. I really wanted to talk about what happened on the ground because it talks to the power of the people and the power of the vote. And it is really important that organizing, that energy, that everyday citizen who took time to say, here's why I'm voting. Here's what this vote means. Here's what redistricting means. Here are my reasons. And in the campaign, what we recognized was that the overwhelming validator in the redistricting campaign was everyday Virginians. That means that voters trusted people they knew, their neighbors, their doctor, their local organizer, people in their community, their faith leaders. These were the ones that were trusted the most. The veteran that's across the street. Those were the voices that mattered most. So I wanted to start with that because I want to emphasize that as we continue to go into election season, we should not be discouraged. We should not feel that our vote doesn't count. That energy, that organizing, that speaking up for what you believe in absolutely does count. They are seeds of, they're democratic seeds that are planted, seeds of democracy that are planted into this American soil, this American experiment. And if we continue to cultivate it, it will yield for us. In a time where our democratic pillars are falling apart, it's now more important than ever that people value their reason of voting and continue to exercise their right to vote. No matter what side you're on, voting matters. Exercising your voice and speaking out matters. As I mentioned, the disinformation was, while disappointing, while could be discouraging, what actually happened was you saw communities come together and really press on and press forward to vote. And I think that's important. And that takes me to my final point about why we cannot be erased. Despite the time that we're in, I recognize that for a lot of people, it can be very discouraging to feel that your vote doesn't count. But I want to impress upon your heart this evening that staying engaged in the democratic process is critical now more than ever. All of that, what happened, no matter what the courts decided, is not for naught. It is not erased, because what you have done as people who participated in this democracy is sending a message that you will not be ignored, that you will continue to remain in the game, and your willingness to continue to show up every time there's a vote, whether it's a vote for your local mayor, whether it's a vote for president, all the way up and down the ballot, every vote matters. Every time there's an election, it matters. So I think as we look at redistricting in the 3.1 million people who voted, who may feel that the courts did not take that into consideration, I want to send a message that elections are coming up again in November. And after that, there'll be, this is Virginia. We have elections every year. Honestly, now we have elections 2 or 3 times a year, depending on what, locality that you're in. And I think that it is important that we tell each other, that we continue to encourage each other. We shouldn't ignore what just happened because it does have an effect. But what we should tell people is, despite the courts nullifying what Voices in Virginia just did, it's more important even now to continue to show up at the ballot box whenever there's an election that happens. So I didn't have I wanted to just summarize what we just did in all the work that went into that, all the organizing on the ground. All of that energy continues to be here, and we need to continue to cultivate that and ensure that not just our generation, but that the next generation continues to understand the importance of voting and does not feel discouraged about voting. So with that, I want to send it back to Krista to see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Corinne. We really appreciate that overview. There is a question for you in the chat, but what I'm going to do is go ahead and start talking a little about some more action steps we can take now, and we can go back to that question. And if anyone else has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. So I conducted some focus groups over the last few years with Black women who were younger, who were inconsistent voters. And there were a couple of things that came out, which I think are really important to how we look at action items in terms of how we get out the vote. So one thing that was clear was that sometimes there is just a discomfort with some people when they walk into the polling place. Now, We know that the people who work at the polls generally are older, retired, have time, or were able to take time off of work. They often look like a certain demographic. And what I found is talking to these younger ladies, it's not that they were afraid when they walked into the polling place, but it just might not have been as comfortable. So I'm not saying that we necessarily need to make the polls into a party, even though there are important ways that we can make voting fun. And I think that's something we do need to talk more about, is the fact that voting does not need to be boring. You know, with the Black Women's Roundtable, they actually conducted a nationwide comedy tour on, clean fun, talking about civic education and voting. So I encourage us all to think about ways we can make voting fun. But I do think there are ways we can think about maybe some tweaks we can make in terms of just the process of walking into that door and making it more welcoming. Now, I know some people, obviously we have stickers. That's great. That's a huge, evolution over time. Some districts, when someone is a first-time voter, they cheer and sound off an alarm and bell. That's very important. But I encourage us and I challenge us all to think about additional ways that that process can be a little bit more comfortable. I know a lot of us try ourselves to take time off work to make sure that the people who are working at the polls are reflective of our communities, and I think that's an important step too. So I just ask us to do that as we move forward. Now, obviously, that's something that we'll see the benefits of long term, but I want us to start thinking more long term too. Another thing I found from the focus groups was that some younger people felt that voting should be easier. Now, as I often say, I'm someone, when I first voted, there was no mail-in, there was no early voting, there was none of that. There was no same-day voter registration. But I think when you realize that younger people have grown up with everything being online, social media, it's so accessible. The idea of having to get in their car, drive to a polling place, or even find a stamp and put something in the a ballot in the mail may seem a bit archaic. So I also encourage and challenge us to think about ways we can continue to improve the process. Now, those younger people I talked to made it clear they understand the issues with election security, and that's not something that should be taken lightly. But we should continue to at least show the ways that we're improving the whole voting process. And I think that would go a long way with younger people. I also really encourage us to think about how we translate a policy decision into changes that impact all of us. That's another thing that came out, is that they felt that, they didn't really feel like their vote mattered. So I think if we do a better job, and I think that takes some work from us and on the front end. We need to think about, okay, so for example, I live in Arlington, Virginia. There was a proposal to have a streetcar several years ago. It did not succeed. I was in favor of the streetcar. I think it could have made a huge impact in the economic development where I live. That's one thing that is a tangible thing to me. It's something that's important to me. I challenge everyone in your particular community, think about the different policy decisions, whether they're things that the school board is talking about, things that the city council is discussing, even things that your local condo association is talking about, and figure out the words now that you will use to talk to people about how that impacts their individual lives. And I think the saying "all politics local" is really key there, because that's just how sometimes we feel these decisions more.
Krista,
I
do you mind if I interrupt you just
Yes,
a
go
moment?
ahead.
Because I
Go
think
ahead.
that's an important point that you made. And it's something that we found in redistricting. And what worked is just the old-fashioned town halls, whether they were in person, and we did a mix of in person and online. But those policy decisions, people had a chance to discuss it and to delve into it and to ask questions. And I think your point is really an important one. We do have to do more of those. Just allow the public to have an opportunity to talk about, well, how does this actually impact my everyday life, and what difference is it going to make, and peeling back that onion and taking the time to do that was some of the most rewarding time on the campaign that I did, is just talking to people about why redistricting matter in their everyday moment in their lives and why it matters to their neighbors. So that is a model for the number of town halls that we did. That is a model I would love to continue to see organizations and candidates continue to just have these community conversations so that people do understand how it impacts their lives.
Absolutely, absolutely. And another thing we found was that a reason why people said they didn't vote is because they don't think elected officials do anything or they
Mm.
don't know what they do. And so
Mhm.
I also challenge our organizations and civil society, even though we know they've got social media, they have newsletters, they do telephone town halls, they do real town halls. We know they're doing the work to get their message out there. But I think now I'm talking about, I know 501c3 and C7 organizations get a little concerned when we start to talk about elected officials, but I'm talking about your elected official, not when they are a candidate. I'm not talking about promoting their campaign. But we can also help promote those things in our community, whether it's bringing them to our events or forwarding their newsletter to our lists or forwarding their social media to our communities. I think that's really important. And I just want to end on, and please continue to put questions in the chat and comments in the chat. I just want to end on a couple of resources and things coming up that could be helpful to those on the call. So there is an initiative called 1 Million Black Voters Rising. It's led by the Black Women's Leadership Collective, and the goal is to focus on not just voter registration, but that's definitely a key piece, but it's relational organizing. So people sign up to be circle leaders, and then they are working with those 10 people that they've selected to first build relationship and then encourage them to vote, encourage them to stay engaged. Additionally, this coming week and also next week, I'll be doing a focus group hosted by Vote Lead Impact, or focus groups targeted towards Black females 18 to 35. They don't necessarily have to be registered voters, but I want to get at their thoughts, particularly around what's going on right now. I want to hear their thoughts on voting, and that will help us with our outreach and our messaging. So please, thank you all for listening to our first panel. Please continue to put questions in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and read some of these. The first question was for you, Corinne. With the SCOTUS denial to hear the Virginia appeal, does that end the appellate process on this issue? Was there any explanation from the SCOTUS on why they denied to take the appeal?
Yeah, there really wasn't very much an explanation. And it does unfortunately end the process for redistricting. But again, I really want to leave the impression that it doesn't end the process with our engagement. And that is so important. Redistricting will come up. Yes, we're disappointed in SCOTUS, especially the other decisions SCOTUS has chosen to make in other states, as we see what's happening in the South and redistricting that's happening in the South. But I do think it's just so important that somebody called me afterward, after the Virginia Supreme Court decision, and you wanted to engage how I was feeling. And one thing that I said is that it's just reinvigorating my determination to stay engaged and to fight for our democracy. So that's the energy I want to pass on to everyone. Reinvigorate your decision to stay invigorated, to stay engaged in the fight for democracy by showing up, by doing exactly what Krista says. I love all those action items. Pick 10 people, talk to them about the issues, talk to them about the three most important issues to you, and just keep the conversation going. Talk to your neighbors. Because believe it or not, the policies decision that your neighbor makes and how they vote will affect you if it's not the right way. So talk to them about what impact that's going to have on you and your family, and make sure people know where you stand, because that's really critical at this time.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to read some of these comments. I think so. Melvina says, and not impact. When we're talking about how decisions impact voters or community members, talk about what impacts them today, not necessarily in the future. That's a good point. And Melvina says, I'm a professor, and these 20-somethings really don't see the one-to-one correlation to their job market, buying power, influence to impact change. So we all need to put our heads together and figure out what's the message. And sometimes it is the messenger, right? We may not always be the right person to have these conversations. And then Seema says, school board member here, we would love to connect with younger voters more. Excellent.
Yeah. Can I say one more thing, Krista,
Yeah.
about the impact, the voting impact for, when young people don't see like what the decisions that I make on policy today, how is that going to impact my future? I'll give a quick story. Several years ago, those of you who live in the area, or in Virginia, actually, you will know that several years ago, remember, school used to start after Labor Day. and then it was on the ballot. Well, when it was on the ballot, I didn't have any children. So I literally didn't care either way when school started. It wasn't on the ballot. Nobody talked to me about it. But now that I have children and I want a little extra time on vacation, I realize it matters. But this example that I use, the reason I use it is because how you vote really does impact your future. You may not see it. Unfortunately, policy is slow. Things don't change overnight. And I know voters want immediate change. And that is why we have to be practical and use practical language and be honest. Because sometimes the policy decision you make today, the vote you decide today, will impact you in your future. And if you don't take a moment to just think about it, if I took a moment and thought, like, well, if I had children, or if I took even a moment to ask my friends who did have children, like, well, how do you guys feel about school starting, before Labor Day? I might have made a different vote. So we need to talk to our young folks and really give them practical and break it down. Sometimes those of us who are in policy, we use really high level philosophy and words. We really just need to break it down to everyday impact so that we could help each other understand the decisions we make today, how that impacts us tomorrow, or how that'll impact our children tomorrow.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Corinne, for
Thank
the.
you for having me.
I'm gonna invite Natasha. I'm gonna add her and Dr. Saini to the stage. And just for the record, I said cognitive based therapy. I know it's cognitive behavioral therapy. I apologize for that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let Natasha start with your comments
Sure.
on mental health and the importance of mental health in this time.
Yes, thank you. I am so happy to be here and talk about all things mental health, or at least to kick it off, because I know I have someone coming behind me to talk a little bit more as well. So, my name is Dr. Natasha Cook. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and I'm a certified professional coach. And today I want to talk about three specific points regarding mental health during Mental Health Awareness Month. So many women, especially those of us who are high achieving women of color, we've mastered the art of looking fine while getting everything done. And meanwhile, we are dying. We are literally dying under the pressure and stress that we have placed upon ourselves and that other people have placed upon us as well. And we have picked it up and just carried it. We've become experts at producing and caregiving, achieving and supporting and leading and surviving, but we're not taking care of ourselves and we are losing ourselves in the process. And there's a couple of cultural pieces, there's a couple of sort of contemporary things that can contribute to that. Um, but I want to make sure that we really understand some of the unspoken issues here are that we believe that if we look good, then we are good. If we are producing, then what's the problem? Because that's what needs to get done. And so that's something that I really want to make sure we can sort of like burst that bubble and really talk very clearly about that's not how it works. So if we go back to the cookout theory that Krista introduced at the top of the hour, talking about what are you bringing, I want you to think about not only what are you bringing, but how are you showing up when you bring it? Because that is part of being part of a group, and it's also mental health. So, what is mental health? It's not the absence of a diagnosis or the presence of a diagnosis, which a lot of people think mental health is a diagnostic condition. It's not. Mental health is how we think, right? Do we show up and we are clear and concise, or are we sort of foggy and having a hard time putting words together? It's how we cope with stress. Are we avoiding it because I can't deal with it, or are we trying to meet it head on? It's how we regulate our emotions. And so, how are you showing up? Are you irritable and agitated and trying to finish people's sentences? Or are you well regulated and able to show up with intention and really be and do what you want to be and do? It's how we communicate with each other. So, am I effective in what I'm trying to share with you? Or are you looking at me like you're not exactly 100% sure what I'm talking about? It's how we make decisions. So, are we using data and are we using intentionality to make these choices? Or are we emotional and we are just trying to get it done because there's emotion and decision fatigue, right? Oh, don't ask me what's for dinner. I don't want to think about it. Don't ask me. Simple question, but I don't want to think about it. And then it's also how we relate to others. Are we being authentic and are we allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, meaning I'm sharing what I really think and feel? Or are we reactive and are we guarded? And there are some cultural considerations in this space, and I'm speaking as an African American female because that's what I know best, but there obviously is a lot of other research out there. But many significant women in our lives have normalized chronic stress, right? You think about our moms, our grandmas, our aunties, our cousins, right? Like, just get it done. Just put your head down and get it done. Don't complain. Nobody cares anyway. Just get it done. And so we pick that up and we carry that as part of what we are supposed to do. But again, productivity does not mean that all is good. And we can often use that productivity to mask what we're really feeling or what we really need, right? Being capable doesn't mean that we're okay. And just because you can carry it doesn't mean it's not heavy and it's not weighing you down. So let's talk about some of these hidden stressors, and maybe some of them are not so hidden, that we carry. One of them is this like strong woman sort of expectation that we got it. No matter what, I got you. I got it. We got it. That's not realistic. And when I talk with clients, I am very, very, very specific about language, especially around realistic expectations. It's not about lowering your expectation. Just make sure your expectation is realistic for the person or the situation. Another thing is that we often feel guilty for resting because there's so many things we should be doing. And I'm putting these things in air quotes because these are not words that I want people to be using. I want you to take it as an air quote kind of a thing. Should and could and need. And those are all really bad words because it indicates that there's some obligation, but often we can't tell you where that obligation came from or how we're going to meet that obligation. We just feel it sort of pressing against us. Another thing regarding mental health and women of colors, we don't want to seem weak, right? Like, I don't want to be emotional. I don't want to be angry. Ooh, you know what that's code for. But we do have meltdowns. We do have crying spells. We do have times where we can't get out of bed. And that doesn't mean that we're diagnostic or there's depression. It means that you could be burnt out or overwhelmed. When you think about what happens in the workplace, people talk about code switching. I got to make sure the language is right. So you see me how I believe you need to see me, so you will take me seriously. We talk about perfectionism traits. I don't need you to tell me I got it wrong because I can't handle that right now. And you're probably not going to say it to me in a way that's kind and caring, or maybe I'm not able to hear it in the way in which you intended it. We also see a lot of women right now trying to outperform others. And this is within the zeitgeist of what's happening in the United States work sector and economy. There are lots of companies that are laying people off for what seems like no good reason. And so everybody's trying to show that they're value added. And that's some significant stress that a lot of people are having a hard time carrying as they're seeing their girlfriends and their moms and their cousins being laid off of work who have degrees and experience, but yet it doesn't seem to matter. A couple other places, there's those family roles, community roles, whether it's a literal or figurative role, head of a church, managing multiple children, managing the people on your block, managing members of your sorority. It could be any number of roles that we might play where we take on a lot of stress and a lot of pressure because it's important to us, but yet it is still stress and pressure. So, what can unmanaged stress look like? Talking about stress, we can look irritable. I didn't mean to snap at you, but I'm stressed, and so I did. We can look anxious, meaning we're worried about a lot of different things. People often talk about having emotional numbness, meaning I just don't feel anything. I'm just going through the day. I'm not happy, sad, or angry or anything. I'm just going. We can have difficulties concentrating. Sleep can absolutely be disrupted. And then people often talk about feeling disconnected in their relationships, where things just don't feel as good as they used to, or we don't talk like we used to. So, how do we manage that? Because burnout is one of these threads that could be flowing through all of these traits as well, or all of these symptoms, I should say, speaking about the workplace. So, awareness is the first way that we manage this. I talk to my clients all the time about asking themselves two questions. The first one is, how am I doing? The second one is, what do I need? And when you ask yourself that question, be realistic about it. How are you doing? And that doesn't have to mean that you talk about being happy, sad, mad. It could be, I've been sitting in this chair for 4 hours and I need to get up and stretch. My body is aching, which then makes me irritable and makes me snippy and makes me not want to listen to what you're saying because I have my own needs. So, setting those boundaries with ourselves and with others can be one way that we can promote good mental health. We can also rest without feeling guilty. Take a break. It's okay. Taking care of yourself by resting or having self-compassion or using self-soothing coping skills doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean you can't get it done. It means you know what your resources are and you know how to use your resources appropriately. Mentally healthy people still need support and they still need to use their resources. So that could be therapy. And there's all different types of therapy. It could be coaching, it could be groups, support groups, it could be clinical in nature or supportive in nature. But then there are a couple of other, like really simple, I'll say simple because it's simple for me, but it might be complicated for you. And we get that. A couple of things you can do. You can make sure that you name your emotions instead of just saying, oh, this feels bad. I don't know what it is, but I don't want to feel it. And then pretend like it's not there. Reduce the amount of time that you commit yourself to things that will take you away from other things. If you know you have 6 demands on your plate, don't add a seventh until you're positive you can manage it without feeling overstressed. Build in recovery time. Recovery time. Every professional athlete or actor or anybody who uses themselves as a tool for being productive recovers. Recovery has to be part of what we do. The last thing I would say is ask for help. This is a very, very hard thing for a lot of people to do. But the sooner you have identified what help you need and you ask for that help, the easier it is for that help to say, I see where we are, and here's how we back away from the hole that you're digging in or get you out of the hole that you're already in, which is a lot easier than when you feel like you're completely buried and overwhelmed. So, to wrap things up for me, I want to make sure that you are aware that caring for your mental health is not selfish. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean that, you're indulgent or bougie. Mental health is health, full stop. So, just like you may or may not, but may go to the doctor and get your blood pressure checked and get your heart rate checked and make sure that your weight is what you would like it to be, mental health is also part of that. It is part of the foundation that allows us to lead and love and serve and succeed without losing ourselves in the process. So that's my time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cook. And I'm going to turn over to Dr. Saini.
All right. Good evening, everybody. And thank you for having me over here. After hearing Dr. Cook, I'm going to try to piggyback off of you, even though the domestic violence is a little more serious, but it starts with the mental health, like Dr. Cook said. But before I go into anything else, I am going to go ahead and just do a small little introduction of what is domestic violence. Domestic violence is the mistreatment of one family member or an intimate partner by another. Now, there are different kinds of violence. It's physical violence. That is the intentional use of physical force to cause pain, injury, or bodily harm. And it could be, hitting someone, slapping, pushing, standing, burning, using a weapon, or not allowing them to leave the space. Sexual violence is anything that is non consensual sexual contact or activity. And that could be rape, coerced sexual acts, unwanted touching. And nowadays, a very big part of sexual violence is image based sexual abuse. That is when someone is sharing your intimate images without consent. Then you have this psychological and emotional violence. This is deliberately cause that causes your mental or emotional pain through threats, intimidation, humiliation, isolation, coercive control, stalking. It includes behaviors that make a person feel worthless, unsafe, fearful. Then you have neglect and deprivation. This is the failure to provide basic, either it's physical, medical, emotional, or educational necessities to a dependent. And that could be a child or an elderly person or your partner. And this leads to harm or distress. Now, a very big part of domestic violence is also the final financial and economic abuse. That's when someone is controlling or stealing someone's money as a primary way of controlling them. And this is basically what domestic violence is in a nutshell. Of course, it goes into different things, but because Krista talked about the cultural stewardship, it kind of narrows my time to talk only about domestic violence. So I am going to go ahead and connect the two at this point. So when we talk about cultural stewardship, what is that? It is a term that refers to preserving and honoring our community values, while domestic violence represents a harmful assertion of power and control, right? So when we use these concepts, intersect them, the cultural norms can either serve as a protective buffer that reinforces these healthy relationships, or it could become weaponized to justify, conceal, or prevent survivors from escaping abuse. So cultural impacts domestic violence, and especially with for people of color, we have seen that. And like Krista introduced me, I am a licensed clinical psychologist, and I do a lot of forensic work. I am also part of the board of Women Empowerment Foundation, and that is a foundation that serves the Indian community, the women of color in from India, and we would I can proudly say that we have impacted so many people in a positive way, and that talks to our cultural stewardship. Now, how does this impact domestic violence? Barriers to seeking help. In so many communities, strong collective values, the stigma of divorce, or rigid patriarchal customs pressure victims to stay in an abusive relationship to preserve family honor. We see that in the Indian community all the time, that women are not willing to come out and talk about their abuse because, oh, what is my family going to say? Oh, what is going to happen if people find out? And a lot of times, because it's a patriarchal society, the parents are not willing to assist these women or support them or stand up with them. And because of all of this, there's a distrust in the external system. A lot of survivors avoid traditional legal or social services because they view them as culturally insensitive or unresponsive to their specific community needs. As a mental health person, not just as a clinician, I have been in this human services field for a very long time. And I myself have noticed a lot of culturally insensitive people. It's not that they're trying to be culturally insensitive. I don't think they understand different cultures. So being culturally sensitive in our communities to help these, victims and survivors is extremely, extremely important. Another thing that impacts how culture impacts domestic violence is the misuse of tradition. While no culture inherently encourages violence, abusers often manipulate cultural or religious traditions to justify their behavior and isolate their victims. When I was working with the victim impact people, I had a very interesting, very, very interesting case that came up with, the Indian community. And 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 at one point the woman was like, there is no divorce in the Hindu culture. um they used that, the man used that, then they used the culture, they used religious days to come up with how the property is going to be distributed. And the judge was like, how does that work? So a lot of people in the system try to use the different religious and cultural things to justify their behavior and isolate their victims. Now, the role of cultural stewardship in preventing this is something that I didn't think about till I was approached and I was like, you know what? We do that. Women Empowerment Foundation does it. We do it. And yet I didn't realize that when I put it down on paper, how it actually looks like. So the ethical cultural stewardship helps communities address domestic violence safely by integrating local traditions with effective trauma-informed support. Now, if it's the community-led support, then we need to design support services that respect the victim's language, the ancestry, and worldviews that increase the likelihood that they will seek help. And this goes back to how PTSD is also looked at now. Earlier, PTSD was just looked at the event. Now we also looked at the perception of the event and who is helping, the support system. All of this is so beautifully interwoven. Then promoting protective factors. Culturally grounded programs need to emphasize passing down traditions of respect, kinship support, and healthy parent child attachments to prevent the normalization of violence. We see so many families breaking up because of the lack of respect, because of the lack of understanding of a healthy parent child relationship. And unfortunately, a lot of forces in families take advantage of that. And that leads to a lot of things in the domestic violence circle. Challenging norms from within. You guys have already talked about that changes come in small steps, baby steps. But till we don't start challenging these norms from within, how are we going to effectively advocate and work alongside with our communities? And faith leaders are so important in this to dispel harmful myths about gender roles and challenge the social tolerance of abuse. One of the places that I know that in this area, in Northern Virginia, people of color can definitely go ahead and approach Women Empowerment Foundation because we do work with the cultural stewardship. And Krista, I cannot thank you enough for allowing me this chance to learn about what I do without even realizing what I do and being able to present it and get it to you guys so that y'all also know that there is a resource out there that does exactly this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Saini. So we do have a couple of questions in the
Sure.
chat. The first one is for you, Dr. Saini from Buda. How can domestic violence become a public-facing community conversation to try and reduce the shame perceived by victims and survivors?
This is a beautiful question because I get this question as an Indian psychologist because mental health is a stigma in the Indian community as well. But it's not just in the Indian community, it is everywhere. It is still not an open conversation. And domestic violence, especially for an Indian woman to go out and talk about it, I will be ostracized. However, it is going to take time. We have to do it in small bits and pieces. Have like the local forums, talk about it. We do need to bring our faith leaders into this also and help them understand that, we are not trying to say religion is bad. We're not trying to say that, don't need to go to the church or the temple or to the mosque or anything. We're just saying that since y'all are the leaders, y'all do have a voice. Let us help protect the families today. Because religion is the opiate of the people anyway. So why cannot we use that such a strong, when it has such a strong definition, why can't we use it for our benefit? Allowing a forum like this, like y'all have provided, to talk about this and how we can work with it is so important and very important. A lot of us strong women that are leaders in our communities. I think it's time for us to stand up and stand together and bring this message out there because one person alone will be bullied. Social bullying, we will be bullied. However, if a lot of us come together, we will be able to start making that impact. And hopefully, in generations, people can take this torch forward and we are able to make this into a problem that never existed.
Absolutely. So I have a question for both of you. So there have been high-profile domestic violence cases even recently, even though we know it happens daily. And there's been a debate about whether the root cause is mental illness or not. What are your thoughts on this?
Dr. Cook, do you want to go or should I start?
I think you should kick it off because obviously domestic violence is your area of specialty.
So I do a lot of evaluations to see whether it was the chicken or the egg. But guess what? It does come together because if there is domestic violence, how can we expect the children to be okay? How can we expect the partner to be okay? So they will develop some kind of anxiety. They will develop something. If there was a genetic predisposition to any kind of mental health disorder, with the stress diatheses model, it could get activated. So then we don't know which came first, right? It's just there. And it's so important to look at the now that it's there. Let's take care of it. How it came, where it came. Yes, it came. So if we take care of what is going on now and then we move backwards to fix the other things, but you cannot in the moment fight which comes first because it's there. It's caused the damage. It's already done what it had to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I think if we have people look at what is happening within a couple, right? So typically when we talk about domestic violence, we talk about something happening between two people, whether they're a partnership, a couple, married, dating, whatever. If there is effective communication, there's a less likelihood we're going to have domestic violence. If there's appropriate care of their own mental health, whether it's a diagnosed condition or not, people can feel burnt out, right? Burnout is not a diagnosable mental health condition within the DSM-5, but burnout can lead to irritability and poor sleep, which means you have poor mood regulation. You're not eating as well. And so when you show up to somebody who is making you angry, right? You feel angry or you feel disappointed or overwhelmed by that person, you are less likely to have those resources within yourself available to you. And so what often happens is people revert back to those primitive ways of interacting, which is arms crossed, tantrum, yelling, shouting. I want you to feel how I feel. So instead of having what's an appropriate way of saying, when you say this, I feel this, we yell back, we shout back, we push, we shove, we do all of these other things because I need you to feel the way I feel right now. And that's when we can get into some very dangerous territory. And so I completely agree. Chicken or egg, I don't know, but it's a
Is there?
problem. It's a
Yeah.
problem.
Can we talk for a moment about, so two things, and I don't want to necessarily connect them, but there's a movement. Well, okay, I'll say the perpetrator. I feel like a lot of times we do not talk about the perpetrator in domestic violence situations as much as we do the survivors or victims. And then also there's a male empowerment kind of movement where there's more and there's no more emphasis placed on the needs of men because they feel like they have been cast aside in society for so long. So obviously we know that most of the time it is a man who's the perpetrator, but not all the time in domestic violence situations. But I just wonder if we can talk about those two concepts and how they relate to mental health and domestic violence, however you want to approach that. Any thoughts about it? Um,
So I think both are really sort of interesting. I mean, there is a whole section within psychology, the psychology of men. And I do think every individual group does have their own mental health needs, right? Like women have different mental health needs than children, than men. And so I think it's important that each group has the ability to go and get some support and resources specific to their group. Now, what often happens with mental health and popular culture is that things get taken out of context. Things get watered down. Things get switched and changed into something that's a cute tagline or, sort of a soundbite. And we sort of miss what the actual essence of it would be. I honestly believe that there needs to be more men going to therapy and going to coaching and going to support groups and being active in their churches and sort of getting this whole person wraparound services on how they can feel more confident and more secure in themselves and what they are meant to do in their lives, as opposed to what the societal pressures are or messages. There's a couple of really interesting books. One of them that comes to mind for me is this book called The Boy Crisis. And it talks about a really interesting bind that we are putting our boys who are growing into men into, because we tell them, be strong, don't cry like a girl, don't be a wuss, don't be a sissy. But then at the same time, we're giving them the message of don't connect with your feelings and don't talk about how you feel. And if you're not tough and stoic, then are you really a man? Are you really a boy? And so I think it's an interesting double bind that we find ourselves in, where we tell men, don't go off and do your own thing and sort of support yourselves in this way. But then there's also societal messages that are like, yeah, you got to figure it out because this is what we expect from you. So do it.
Exactly.
So I'm going to piggyback off of that since you talked about the mental health part of this. Um, since I do a lot of these evaluations and I have seen a shift in which, men are coming up to us and like, oh, you guys only look at what the women do and, you're not looking at what happens to us, what they do to us. Okay, let's look at it. Let's compare it and let's see. Like, yes, there are some women that do abuse the men, because they get violent. It's more violence. We see more of violence with the women, like physical violence that the women do with the men. And we see a lot of the emotional abuse that men do on the women. So that is one comparison. But I do know that there was this whole movement that had happened like a decade ago that, oh, it's just, y'all are just looking at the women. It's a women-based society. It's only the women that can go through this. You don't understand what the men do. Okay, we would love to do that, but now that is also being used against the women. So we need, once again, we need to be the gatekeepers to help see how we can help balance that discrepancy, because if we are not able to do it, then that's a problem. And we have seen this not just in my practice but also in Women Empowerment Foundation, where a couple of men have like, oh, you're not going to understand what we're going through because we were abused by the women. And we had to be, yes, we are Women Empowerment Foundation. However, if you have been abused, we are definitely willing to listen to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any final words that you all have before we close?
I can only tell you, I cannot thank you guys enough. Like I said, that we were doing all of this without realizing, and it has been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I would say like, just, in the last couple of days of May being Mental Health Awareness Month, take a little time to be aware of your mental health. Ask yourself two questions. How are you doing and what do you need? And then take some time to give yourself something that you need. And it could be as simple as just one small thing every day that you do.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. This has been an amazing conversation. On behalf of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, Phi Upsilon Zeta chapter, we are so thankful for all of the great work you all are doing in our community. So thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.